In progression from my preliminary task to my final project, I think that I've improved my image as a whole. The first reason for this would be due to the change of camera. For my preliminary task, I used a built-in camera from my own phone, whereas my final piece I use a better quality camera. This improved the quality of my pictures, making them look more professional and easier to edit. When taking my pictures for my preliminary task, I only took a couple, and this was extremely limited for choice, unlike in my final piece where I had several different pictures to choose from. I also learned a lot about shot types through the process. When undergoing the preliminary task, I had done little research into conventions of a magazine and used an image of someone on the half turn looking away from the camera. Through research, I noticed the majority of magazines showed the cover artist to be in a medium shot, face on, directly looking at the audience, engaging them to the magazine, which is what I did. I put a lot more thought into how I wanted my images to look and where they would be placed on the pages. I did this by looking at style models and also by creating Photoshop plans of what I wanted my result to look like. In my final piece, research really enabled me to understand what my audience wants, so that I was able to incorporate this into my magazine more than in my preliminary task. There's also been improvement in my presentation skills over the course. In terms of font in my preliminary task, I used a basic Arial font for all of my text, making it difficult to distinguish which points were most important. However, in my final piece, I used a website called The Font in order to download text into the font book of the Mac. This made my magazine look more like a rap magazine and appealing to the consumer. I also experimented on Photoshop with the character tool. This allowed me to play around with the length and width of individual letters. The adjusting spacing of letters made my magazine look more eye-catching, and not everything was in the same size. I also learned about the left third in my research after creating my preliminary task. I understood that on the shelves you would only see the first third of a magazine cover if they were stacked. With this in mind, I made sure all of the most important information could be seen in this third of the magazine. In order for this to look professional, I used the ruler tool to align my work into columns, keeping it looking professional. However, the biggest change for me was in my preliminary task. I used Paint and Word in order to create my magazine. As I wasn't familiar with Photoshop at the time, the result of my preliminary task, because of this, isn't as professional as it would have been if I was using Photoshop. Overall, I think I've become more confident using Photoshop and other media tools that I hadn't used before starting the course. I think it is clear when comparing the differences between my preliminary task and my final piece. I have shown an improvement in various different skills. I've used media programs in order to portray my work on my blog, and as you can see from the development of the course, I've been able to create much more eye-catching posts instead of just word and picture.